Hello learners. In this lecture, we will be talking about the concept of transboundary environmental problems. Till now, we have been talking about the environmental issues like what is market failure in case of environmental goods. We've also seen that why environmental valuation is important. We have also talked about environmental accounting. As we all know, the environment problems transcend beyond the boundaries of a particular region, a state, or a country. That brings us to the concept of transboundary environmental problems. I am Dr. Aparna Samudra from Department of Economics, RTM Nagpur University, Nagpur, and I will be explaining you the whole concept of transboundary environmental problems. Let us have a look at the learning objectives of this particular lecture. We will understand the concept and types of transboundary environmental issues, and then we will understand the concept of global commons. Does something strike you with when I say global commons? Do you remember we did something called as tragedy of commons? We will see that how global commons, this concept, is related to tragedy of commons. But before that, let me show you a picture and give it a thought what I am trying to say from this picture. This is crop residue burning. Which city picture I am showing to you, learners? This is Delhi. Do you hear the problem of smog in Delhi, particularly in the winter months of the year, November, December? Country India Gate, which we see here, which is very clear in the other months of the year, becomes smoggy during winter. Why? Because it is said that the farmers in Punjab and Haryana burn their crop residue. When they burn the crop residue, the smoke does not get contained only in Punjab and Haryana. It goes and settles down in the neighboring state of Delhi, which is the capital of our country. And we see a situation like this. Another picture which I am showing you is from a research article wherein they have explained that when there is agriculture residue fire or when agriculture crop burning is there, then what happens to the air pollution in the neighboring country of India, which is Nepal? What it is said is that when the crop residue burning takes place in Punjab and Haryana, what happens is that with the wind, the weather-aided pollution transports this air pollution to Nepal, and an air pollution spike is seen in Nepal. What is it? It is a case of a transboundary pollution. That is, the pollution caused in one region or in one country or in one state has taken itself to another country, to another state, to another region. One more case study I want to share with you before we move into the concepts and the theoretical part. This is about Montara oil spill in 2009. The location is Timor Sea, which is between Australia and Indonesia. The impact of this oil spill was so much that it affected the marine ecosystem, coral reefs, and fishing grounds in both the countries, that is Australia and Indonesia. This oil slick further drifted towards Indonesian waters, prompting concerns about its impact on the local fishing communities in Indonesia and marine biodiversity. If you see this picture which I have taken, what does it show? This particular area is the area where the oil spill happened. But did it get contained only to the waters between Australia and Indonesia? No. This oil spill, the impact was felt far away also. This is what we will be talking about today, learners, in transboundary pollution problems. A transboundary environmental issue or in pollution problems are those environmental problems that cross political or geographical boundaries, affecting multiple countries or regions. As the name indicates, these environmental issues, problems, do not get contained in a particular region. They affect the political or geographical boundaries and hence affects multiple countries and regions. In other words, it is an environmental problem which is originating in or contributed by one country and affects or impacts another country. That is, these environmental problems originate at one place, but the impact of these environmental problems goes beyond that area. It splits over to a number of countries or regions. These problems hence span a country's borders and are felt regionally, globally as well. That is, they are not, as I said, they do not get contained themselves to any region, but they get affected globally. For example, ozone layer depletion. Does it affect only one country? No, it is affecting the entire earth. Loss of biodiversity, climate change, they are all the examples of those pollution problems or environmental problems which are not limiting themselves to one country. They are extending themselves to various countries of the world. Now let us have a look at the transboundary environmental problem types. What are the various types of environmental problems which can be classified as transboundary? The first itself is transboundary pollution. We all know pollution can be transported across hundreds and even thousands of kilometers. It may range being regional, that is affecting neighboring countries. For example, we just saw the picture of air crop residue burning on Nepal. So it is affecting another nation, or it may affect the entire globe. That is, various nations are getting affected, even though the intensity may be different, but it is having an impact on many nations of the world. As for example, we saw oil spills. For example, ozone layer depletion is a classic example where it is affecting the globe. Another example or another case study is of Aral Sea crisis. What is this issue? The Aral Sea is located between Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. This sea has shrunk dramatically. Why? Because due to the diversion of inflowing rivers for irrigation purpose. That is, the rivers which were being flowing in these regions, they are diverted for irrigation purpose. Now, what has happened because of the shrinkage of the Aral Sea? This has led to increased salinity levels. The salinity level, which has an impact on ultimately on the agricultural productivity, because the salinity level becomes high, not only the biodiversity is affected, it has also have an effect on the local climate and the public health. Dust storms carrying salt and chemical residues from the exposed seabed have also affected air quality in the neighboring regions. So, a sea which is located between two countries, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, which has shrunk dramatically. It is a change in the environment. Why did it shrink? Because there was a diversion of the inflowing rivers to the irrigation. What happened because of that? Because of this salinity increased in that area, led to loss of biodiversity, adverse impact on the local climate, and dust storms which do not get limited only to that area, but it is deteriorating the public health of the neighboring area residents also. The second type of environmental problem, which is transboundary in nature, is transboundary water conflict. Transboundary water conflict is defined as verbal, economic, or military hostile actions between stakeholders over internationally shared water resource. Now you will say that how water conflict is an environment problem. Water conflict arises generally when there is water shortage. When the natural rivers, the water gets less or the rivers shrink, then water conflict arises, because we all know that every country, for the purpose of agriculture, for the basic survival of humanity, they need water. So boundary water conflict can be defined as a verbal, economic, or military hostile action between stakeholders over internationally shared water resources. Those water resources which are shared internationally between countries. When the conflict arises because of that water, we will call it as a transboundary environmental problem. A classic case is sharing of water of the Tista River, which originates in the Himalayas, flows through Sikkim and West Bengal, which are a part of India, and then this Tista River merges with Brahmaputra in Assam and Jamuna in Bangladesh. And it is one of the most contentious issue between two friendly neighbors, that is India and Bangladesh. Because the countries, the people residing in those regions want water to be used by them. Another type of transboundary environmental problem which arises is the climate-induced migration, and it is getting more and more intensified with passing of time. What is climate-induced migration? Rising temperatures and extreme weather events force people to migrate. For example, when there is a massive drought over a long period of time, people in those regions migrate from these region to another region. Or when the temperature rises gradually, because of which their water scarcity happens, or if the agriculture productivity declines because there is no water for agriculture or for irrigation, then it forces people to move away from those places to another places. But in this case, we are not limiting this migration within the country. We are talking about this migration across the boundaries of countries. In year 2020 alone, over 40.5 million people were forced to relocate, with 30.7 million of them being directly impacted by natural hazards. What does it say? This is talking about the intensity of climate-induced migration. That is, 30.7 million people in the world were directly affected by natural hazards, which are more because of the actions of the humans over a long period of time, where we have disregarded the environment, and now we are seeing these extreme weather events, because of which generally it is the marginalized people, the poor people, who bear the greatest brunt of such situations. So they have been forced to migrate. This migration causes environmental strains on areas where displaced peoples are migrating. So this migration which is taking place probably has taken place because of environmental damage or extreme weather events, but it will also have an impact on those regions where these people are migrating, primarily because for that area, it becomes too much to handle so many displaced people. So that leads to another problem of environment in those regions. Another type of transboundary environmental problem is the disposal of hazardous waste. Rapid industrialization has led to increase in hazardous waste, for example, e-waste that we see. Tightening of regulations combined with increasing lack of landfill sites has caused a rise in the price of waste disposal. Because no country, when you realize that this waste is very hazardous, what happens is people try to control the disposal of this waste by charging a very high price for its disposal. Also, because as area shrinks, the landfills available, the landfill sites which are available for the disposal of this waste is also reduces. Hence, in a search of cheaper waste disposal, this was met by possibility of transporting waste to other countries that did not have such rigid regulation or could be persuaded to accept hazardous waste. See how this is happening. That rapid industrialization, probably in developed nations, in the industrialized nations, led to an increased hazardous waste. As the economic development, economic growth took place, people became more aware about the problems associated with this hazardous waste. Hence, strong regulations were imposed to avoid having this hazardous waste in those locations. Landfill sites were also not available. Then what would happen? So, eventually, the search for cheaper waste disposable sites was found, it was found, and it was met with the possibility of transporting this waste to another country of the world, probably which was in need of money but did not have very strong environmental regulations. This is one example, this is one data rather which I am showing you. This is 2011 data on the Global E-Waste Statistical Partnership. What does it show? If you see this carefully, we have shown you the world map. In this world map, some of the highest and lowest e-waste generating nations are given. If you see this, the European nations which are very, very conscious about their environment are those nations which have the highest e-waste generation. So they themselves probably are green, but what are they doing? They are shifting this e-waste to those nations which are which are not having very high strong waste management regulations. So the regions of the developed nations like the United States, like the European countries, they are sending these e-waste to the closer neighborhood countries where the environmental regulations are low. For example, North America is sending the e-waste to Brazil and to Mexico. European nations are sending it to China. They're sending it to India. Australia is sending it to Thailand. So what is happening is that we are talking about a situation where one country is able to reduce its e-waste by sending that e-waste to another country. Don't you think that over a period of time, this will become a problem for these nations where this e-waste is being dumped? Do you think it will not create a transboundary environmental issues, which we saw something in case of water? Yes, it will. So all these transboundary issues are what is going to be the are going to be the future conflict zone in the world. Now let us have a look at issues in transboundary pollution. For example, if a pollution is there in a country, there are many ways of handling those pollution. We have already talked about. For example, command and control approach is there. Imposition of taxes is there. But when it comes to transboundary pollution, the solutions and the problem, the issues become very different. How do they become different? Let's just have a look at it. The first issue which comes in transboundary pollution is how to collect compensation for damage. Where will I go to ask for the damage which is being done to me because pollution was generated in your country? For example, we have just seen that how crop residue burning in, let us say, northern parts of India is causing a problem in Nepal. Now, if the same would have been true only for the state of Delhi, which always says that, okay, Punjab and Haryana is giving this, so Delhi calls out to the chief ministers of those states and tell them to ask their farmers to stop this burning. The citizens of that country can approach to the Supreme Court or the National Green Tribunal for asking for the regulation with respect to the crop burning. But what will happen to the residents of Nepal? How will they claim these damages? Who will go? Where they have to go? Is there any fair mechanism which is associated? That is a very big question to answer. Second important issue which comes in transboundary pollution is no polluter pays statute is in the international law doctrine. We know what is polluters pay. Polluters pay principles say people who create pollution should be responsible to pay damages to the people who are taking a brunt of this pollution. However, when we talk about international law statutes, the international law regulation, there is no polluter pay statute. There is no international doctrine which says that who will define the polluter pay statute. So that is another issue. Then, of course, there is a very big problem of weak property rights. We already know one of the issue which happens in environmental economics is that the property rights are very weak for those resources which are common resources. In transboundary pollution, these problems become all the more intensified because the common resources are shared globally, internationally. So, who will take the property right? How will we define that property right becomes a problem, and it becomes a no one's baby. When something becomes a no one's baby, the deterioration starts faster. So that problem is another issue in transboundary pollution. And then, of course, varying consensus amongst the nations. The developed nations and the developing nations view pollution in a different way, view environmental problems in a different way. For developing nations, a greater focus or more resources are desired to be spent on their economic growth. Whereas for the developed nations, they have already achieved a certain stage of growth and development. Hence, for them, pollution, they have enough resources to tackle the waste which is being generated. Hence, there is no one consensus regarding the transboundary pollution between the nations, which are the developing nations and developed nations. And also, the implementation of any type of agreement is very different between different kinds of nations. Therefore, the transboundary pollution problem gets intensified. This brings us to the other concept of this lecture, which is global commons. Common resources we have already understood in the initial lectures. We had said that common resources have a characteristic of non-excludability. That is, you cannot exclude one person from using that resource, but they are rival. Why they are rival? Because consumption of one may be having an impact on the other. Now, global commons is an aspect of the more generic concept of commons in the particular context of resources. The very large commons that do not fall within the jurisdiction of any one country are known as international commons or global commons. That is, those very large common resources which are not falling in the jurisdiction of any one nation or any one country. They are known as international commons or global commons. But let us distinguish both the terms international and global commons. International commons are resource domains shared by more than one nation. For example, we have seen the case of Tista River in India and Bangladesh, which is being shared by two nations. So, international commons are those resource domains which are shared by more than one nation. Global commons, on the other hand, are resource domains to which all nations have legal access, such as outer space. So, when we talk about outer space, it is not a resource domain of one or two nations. The whole world, for the whole world, it is a resource domain. So, global commons are those to which all nations have legal access. Anybody can send a space shuttle in the space shuttle. There is no stopping any country for sending a space shuttle. This means that space, outer space, is a global common because no nation has any one legal access. Traditionally, if we want to define global commons, they say it is parts of the planet which fall outside the national jurisdiction of any country and to which all nations have access. So, what are global commons? We say they are defined as parts of the planet. Of course, we're talking about Earth. It is defined as parts of the planet which fall outside the national jurisdiction of any country and to which all nations have access. So, unlike international commons, where the resource may be shared by two or three nations, but in case of global commons, all the nations of the world have the access to that resource and it is outside the national jurisdiction of any one country. Mercator Research Institute on Global Commons and Climate Change, Berlin, defines global commons as natural resources which require global cooperation for their sustainable use, such as atmosphere, land, and forests. Very comprehensive definition is given of global commons, which says these are what? These are natural resources. What do they require? They require global cooperation for what? For their sustainable use. So, those resources which are shared by everyone in this planet, they require more global cooperation because they need to be used sustainably. And examples they have given is, for example, atmosphere, land and forests. International law identifies global commons of four types. One is the high seas and the oceans. Second is Antarctica. Third is the atmosphere. And then we have the space. These are the four global commons which are identified by the international law. Now, global commons gets us to another concept of climate change. Climate change, we say, refers to the change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time period. Because we have just said that global commons include atmosphere, this means that the climate change is an aspect which has to be looked in view of global commons. What is climate change? Again, we will discuss this definition. It says it is the change in the climate. Why? Which may be attributed directly or indirectly to human activity. And because of this human activity, what is happening is that the composition of the global atmosphere has changed, and apart from this, climate variability is also observed. Therefore, we see a lot of agreements on climate change amongst at a multilateral level, because atmosphere is not, if there is a depletion in climate, it will have an impact on everyone in the world. Now, climate change, as I just said, is considered as a global problem of commons. Reasons: 1. Shared resources. Atmosphere is shared by all of us. Oceans are a global common as defined by international law. So, if there is a rise in the sea level, or if there is an oil spill, or if there is a damage to the ecosystem in the oceans, it is going to have an impact on each and every nation. Another reason why global climate change is considered as a global problem of commons is that we talk about individual benefit versus collective cost. Probably one country of the world is, let us say, overfishing in the international waters. It will have an individual benefit of the fishermen of that country, but it will have a collective cost on all the nations if the marine biodiversity gets damaged. Therefore, individual benefit, which is considered is of an individual country, is compared to collective action is needed. Collective cost is needed. So, climate change is therefore considered as a global problem of commons. Also, it shows a diffused impact. The impact is not immediately known. Over a period of time, we come to know that the impact is the climate change has come to our country also. We always have been hearing of how the glaciers are melting, how the Arctic Circle is changing, how Antarctica is changing. But it's only when we see something happening closer by to our cities, to our country, that we identify that the climate change is there. So, because there's a diffused impact, therefore climate change is considered as a global common. And then, of course, there's a problem of free rider. For example, if one country or a group of countries have come together to solve the problem of climate change, and they are spending resources, financial as well as human resources, in order to improve it, but the benefit will be taken by other countries as well, who may not be cooperating in this whole process. Hence, it is considered that the global climate change is a global common problem. Now comes the question, then how should the global commons be governed? As I've told you, the most important way in which the global commons can be governed is through international agreements. That is, multilateral agreements or bilateral agreements where collectively internationally treaties or agreements are designed which say that how do we tackle the problem of climate change, let us say. So, certain important agreements I have written here, for example, the Paris Agreement, the Antarctic Treaty System, the United Nations Conventions on the Law of the Sea, they all talk about governance of the global commons. Then, another body through which this can be done is through the multilateral institutions. One, the countries may form international agreements. Second, the multilateral organizations like the UN, the International Maritime Organization, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. These are multilateral institutions which play a very important role in governing the global commons, because as we all know, these global commons are being shared by everyone. So it is only through these multilateral organizations and these countries which are a part of these multilateral organizations will see that how we tackle the problems related to global commons. And then, of course, the market-based mechanisms like carbon trading, emission trading, wherein certain levels of emissions are allowed. After that, all those who are emitting more can buy these credits from those who are emitting less pollution. So these are some of the ways in which the global commons can be governed. But do you think, learners, it is so easy to govern the global commons? No. There are various challenges associated in global governance of the global commons. Let us see those challenges. First is enforcement and compliance. Paris Agreement says, okay, we will reduce the emissions, or we will not let the world temperature increase by more than 1.5 degrees centigrade or 2 degrees centigrade. And for that, every nation of this world has to contribute so much in reduction of their CO2 emissions. But are they complied equally effectively in all the countries? Are they enforced equally effective in all the countries? If not, then will we be able to solve the problem of global commons? Second, equity and fairness. Do the norms which are set in order to govern the global commons, are they fair for all? Or are they giving equal, are they following the principle of equity? It should not be that in order to solve the environmental issues in the richer nations, the pollution gets exported to the poorer nations. As we just saw the case of e-waste. That e-waste generation, maximum generation, was in the developed nations. But where were they sending it? They were sending it to the low-income nations. So is it equity and is it fair to have such kind of a system? No. So equity and fairness is another challenge, because many times when multilateral agreements on environment are made, there are a lot of contradictions and controversies related to it, because many times the developing nations feel that they are not being fairly treated, because their growth may be hampered if they follow so strictly the carbon emission norms. Another challenge is the political will. Many times, politicians, in order to garner support, do not want to go against the capitalists. So that crony capitalism disables having a good global governance system of the global commons. They know that if they, for example, if they are told that do not have such kind of a industry because it is, let us say, very environmentally damaging. But if the politicians know that it will have an impact on the growth of that area, or it will have an impact on their FDI, or it will have an impact on the employment, they may go a little easy on that. So lack of political will may not make the global commons problem solving so easy. So let us revise this interesting lecture that we did. We talked about transboundary problem is an environmental problem which originates in one or is contributed by one or more countries. For example, air pollution, water pollution, and biodiversity loss. Then we understood what is global commons. We said global commons are natural resources and environmental domains that are not owned by any one nation and are shared globally. We have also understood that how global commons can be governed and what are the challenges in their governance. By this lecture, I hope you can understand that how globalization has not only limited itself to the growth of the economies, but also created new types of environmental issues. So thank you very much, learners. We'll meet you in the next lecture soon.